streaming service. Okay.
Yeah, so.
I'm so grateful for tech people.
Yes, definitely. Yeah. They're the best. So I'm seeing all sorts of wonderful gestures. So we're live. Yes, we're on. All right. Good evening, everyone. It's good to see you all. We're working out a few little things here on our end. And while we're doing that, I just want to warmly welcome you to our time together with Marilyn Vancil tonight. And this isn't really idle chit chat to get ready for the actual presentation. But I do want to let everyone know how I met Marilyn. And this says I'm muted.
You're fine.
Okay, I'll just keep rolling then. So I met Marilyn. I don't know if you remember this, Marilyn. It was an International Enneagram Association annual conference in a hotel somewhere in the United States. And I'm a breakfast person. Anyone who knows me knows I'm very deeply committed to breakfast. So I went down to the hotel cafe to grab a bite to eat. And I thought, well, I could maybe get to know someone. You know, early in the morning, sometimes it can be a little strange. So I scanned the room and I looked for someone with, first of all, a name badge that shows that they're part of our conference. So people wouldn't think I'm accosting them. And then I saw Marilyn and she looked kind of cool. So I said, may I join you for breakfast? And you said, yes. And it was so fun because I sat down and we started talking. Come to find out, you know, I'm a follower of Jesus. You're a follower of Jesus. I'm going, oh my gosh, that's great. You and your husband, Jeff, have worked with Young Life for decades. And I love, in Chicago, we have very active Young Life and Young Lives programs. So I love them. And that you had written this Enneagram book from a Christian perspective, basically a biblical approach to the Enneagram. And up until that time, this is a couple of years ago, everyone, up until that time, the only Christian book that I was aware of was Richard Rohr's, which is a great book. So having yours, you know, added to my little library was so wonderful. And I remember getting your book and going, oh my word, this is great. And I've used it ever since. So that, yeah, I want to thank you for being brave enough to accept, you know, to allow me to sit down with you and hang out.
It was a great, yeah, that was a gift to me too. So it was really,
yeah, it was pretty fun.
Brave of you to sit down, but I was grateful for that conversation.
Yeah,
and we saw each other again.
I know. So
San Antonio, and we went for a walk along the canal there and had a great conversation too.
Yeah. So we're best friends now. And as an Enneagram 7, of course, I would say that, right? And as an Enneagram 9, you kind of go, okay, fine.
Okay, sure.
I know, sure, whatever. So how are we looking? How are we looking, guys? Are we good to go? Can we roll?
No, keep going.
Okay, keep talking about stuff. All right. Well, tell us about your writing process. You're writing this new book. And so do you write every day for like 1 million hours or just block out a month or?
Yeah, well, I'm better at blocking out blocks of time rather than every day because my everyday life is it's full of different things. So, you know, it's been a challenge. I'm supposed to get the manuscript in, the second draft in the end of this week. But this whole month has been filled with my 100-year-old dad being at our home. And then we had a huge birthday party for him this weekend. So I organized the whole thing. So writing has been fits and starts, but it's almost done.
Wow. And so how long have you been working on this book?
Well, Random House approached me maybe 2 years ago. Whoops. I hope my internet doesn't go and I freeze because we don't have a great one. Did I freeze there?
A little bit, but we could still hear you.
Okay. So Random House, the Christian division of Random House, the editorial director called me because she had my book, which was self-published, Self-Delude, Self-Defined, the first book. And she asked if they could republish it under their brand, the new cover, and maybe some edits, which I had wanted to do anyway, but I was never, there it is, da da da. And so then she said, are you going to write another book? And I was like, no, I don't want to write another book. She said, but then I said, but I wanted to say more about what I write about in the beginning of the book. I don't want to write another Enneagram book, but it can include the Enneagram. And so I thought about it. I just knew that it was such an arduous process that I didn't know. I had to decide if I wanted to really go into that again. But I said yes. And so probably seriously working on it for a little over a year.
Nice. Oh, I love that. So guys, before we get started, if I could get the clock back in the corner, that would be really helpful. It's somehow gone. There we go. Thank you. Well, I think we're ready to roll, doggone it. Yeah? Do I get a okay from the guys? Yes, thumbs up on this end. Thank you, men. We have a wonderful tech crew here at Jesus People who work so hard for these JP conversations. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to another said JP, Jesus People conversation. We have these about once a month, and we try to meet with authors, speakers, and thought leaders who are addressing issues that are important to us and we feel are important to you as followers of Jesus. And this month, I'm so excited. Our topic is one that's dear to my heart, using the Enneagram as a tool to help us lead a more God-centered life. And my guest this evening is my good friend. If you were on earlier before we were officially going, you heard the story of how I met Marilyn Vancil. Marilyn is a prolific writer. She's a spiritual director. She was trained in the Enneagram narrative tradition, which is one of the oldest schools of the Enneagram and so respected, so solid. She's a retreat leader, spiritual director, speaker, coach. She does all the things. And she's a wonderful person. So Marilyn, welcome to our evening together.
Thank you. Thank you so much. It's great to be here. I so appreciate the invitation to join your group. I feel like now I have a new connection in Chicago, or I had a connection with you, but just a connection to your community there, which is fascinating to me. So hopefully maybe someday I can come out and visit in person.
That would be great. From Seattle, which is where you are, right?
Well, we just moved to Spokane in the fall. So,
okay.
But state of Washington.
Yeah, but far away from us. So you're, yeah. So let's jump right in. This is going to be such a great conversation. So Marilyn, tell us about your personal journey with the Enneagram and how you discovered it, how you realized and made it applicable to your faith journey. Yeah, tell us about all that.
Okay, well, my journey began 30 years ago before it was a fad, and then it wasn't very well known, really. And so I'm dating myself here because I was in my late 30s. And a friend of ours, a Young Life leader, you mentioned that we were involved in Young Life, gave my husband, Jeff, a set of cassette tapes. And they were by Richard Rohr, but I didn't know who Richard Rohr was. Never heard of him before. And I come from the evangelical stream of things, of the Christian family. And so this series of cassette tapes, you know, the kind where you had to flip them over in the boom box, it was called Naming Your Illusions. And it had this symbol on it with all these lines, and I was not interested at all. I thought, whoa, what is this woo-woo, new age? And of course, the new age thing was scary to the evangelical people. And so I didn't want to listen to it at all. I was like, what is this? And so Jeff listened to it first. And he had his big boom box out in the yard while he was working in the yard. And so he listened to it, and he came in the house and said, I think you'd really like this. It's fascinating. He said it's 9 different, kind of told me a little bit about it and said, well, I found myself, but I have one more to listen to, but I haven't found you yet. And then I could hear him laughing as he's listening to Type 9. Said, oh my gosh, this is my life. And so for us, it was really clear from the very beginning which type we most identified with. And Richard Rohr did a great job of explaining that. And so for me, it was eye-opening, because I think this is pretty common for nines, is feeling when I read a sentence that said and I found a bunch of books, which isn't easy to do back 30 years from now either. And 30 years ago, I mean, and there was a sentence that said, type nines have a vague sense of themselves. And I just wept. Like, yes, I do. Why do I feel like I'm just kind of everything to everybody, sort of chameleon, just going with the flow? But I didn't feel this, conviction about much, and strife. And I was around a lot of those kind of people. And so it just helped me understand myself and be known. I felt really known. And it was a comfort to me to realize that I actually had a personality that was described, that this was like a person, this is a kind of person, and that I'm not just this wishy-washy, don't know who I am, go along with the flow, go with the flow with everyone else. And my husband being a 3, for him, and I'll just share his story a little bit. He has all that energy. He was convicted, like, oh no, it just, like, he understood his false self and his backside, his shadow side, and it was embarrassing and humiliating in a lot of ways to him. So we came at it with different experiences. But I was just fascinated. It helped our relationship. Like, all of a sudden, oh, no wonder we continue to have these particular conflicts, because of our energy and the way we see life. And it helped us to have compassion for each other, and compassion for ourselves. Like, oh, this is why we do this, what we do. And to have some, instead of self-judgment or questioning, it was like, oh, this is the things that I struggle with, or this is the filter that you see life through, and I can understand and have compassion and acceptance rather than judgment towards myself and towards him or towards anyone else. And so that was really important. It also gave me compassion for other people, because I realized they have a different story too. And not everybody sees life through my lens. Not everybody lives life with my filter, and that everyone has a story, even if their behaviors are confusing to me. I have to step back and say, well, they have a story, an inner motivation that drives that. And I'd like to understand what that is. And if we can understand that about each other, it creates a lot more intimacy or connection. If we can see behind the lens of someone else and recognize that it's valid and important.
Yeah, well, and it also helps to know another person's style. I love what you said, to have compassion with them and compassion with yourself, but even to know that they're not intentionally trying to irritate you. They're not trying to drive you crazy. It's how they're wired. And that I have found that so helpful, that it's like, this isn't about me, right?
Right. And even if, it's important not to try to type everybody in the world out of your own observations of them, but it just helps to know that they actually have a different filter. Whatever it is, it's different, and it's who they are, how they're wired, how they approach life, and the filter they look through. So that was really important for me.
Yeah, that's really good.
Yeah.
Well,
So
and then
my faith, you asked, you asked about my faith and how the Enneagram helped. Well, that was kind of the next thing, is that it was just kind of fun to learn about being a 9 and learn, about other types. And I really, gravitated towards all of that learning. But then I came up against my shadow side, like, oh, woe is me. I am, I could see my shadow side. I think 9s can kind of feel like, oh, I'm the nice person, and so it maybe isn't quite as obvious like it was to my husband, but it really led me to some confession and recognizing that I had developed this false persona, that I was kind of like my own God and my own way of being in the world, that came, that was getting in the way, really, of my relationship with God. And then it was kind of led to consent, like, oh God, change me. I can't change myself. And so it began, it started to influence my understanding of my own need for God and my dependence on God and my desire for God to change me and transform me. So.
Oh, I love that. Well, and then next thing you know, you've written this wonderful book, Self to Lose, Self to Find. And from the book, it's actually from the Getting Started chapter. I pulled out a quote that I want to read and then have you maybe explain a little more about the Enneagram and comment on this quote. So here's the quote. The Enneagram illustrates our true essence as one who has been created in God's image, and how our distorted beliefs and ingrained strategies hinder the full expression of who God designed us to become. Wow.
I guess that's a pretty good statement. It's pretty loaded.
Yeah, I know you wrote that. Can you believe it?
Did I write that? I guess I did. So I see the Enneagram, the Enneagram types in their best, in their higher qualities as reflections of God's image, of God's goodness, of God's love, of God's hope, of God's depth, of God's wisdom, of God's faithfulness, God's joy, power, and peace. And then I believe that we were all created to reflect his, the scriptures say we're created to reflect his image, created in his image and to reflect his image. And I think all of us are hardwired in a certain way to just long to experience and express the divine gift that has been imprinted on us. And we each have just a propensity, like I said, a hardwiring, a leaning into just a certain expression of God. We're not all God, we don't reflect all of God because we're not God, but there's a particular aspect of God that just feels really familiar, really feels like home to us. And we want to experience it more and more, and we want to express it out in the world. And so it's an inward understanding and longing. It's also a longing to be that in the world, in our relationships and in our purpose in the world. So to me, that's the divine essence that we all have, and that we're unique in that. We're each of us unique. And so the Enneagram points out 9 different gifts, divine gifts, that is a reflection of God's image. And then as little people, we had to survive in this world that we were thrown into. And we started to figure out, how do we need to act? How do we need to be? What do we need to do? What should we feel to be loved and accepted, to be safe, have some sense of control? And so then, and I liken it in my book to a seed with a seed coat around it. And a seed, is meant to bear fruit, but it's vulnerable and it's tender. And if it doesn't have this seed coat that forms around it until it's ready to germinate, it will just, go by the wayside. And so this persona that we develop, and I call it the adapted self, not the false self, but it's the adapted self. We've adapted to the world, we've adapted to our environment, and our hard wiring that I talked about earlier, and I call it our authentic self, flavors how that persona is developed. But then we have these protective strategies that help us navigate the world, and it's part of our human development, and it's important. But then there comes a time when it just doesn't work anymore. In fact, it starts to backfire on us. And that's when the journey toward towards transformation with Jesus is we start to understand the self to lose. And because then starting to have to let go of all those strategies, all that persona that's been such a good friend to us, but it no longer is working anymore. So I think the Enneagram, I see the Enneagram as a way of identifying that. And, and Paul says, put off the old self, put on the new. And it helps us identify that specific old self pattern that we have isn't, is unique to us, and what do we need to put off so that then we have that new life in Christ, our seed can grow and develop. So I call that, I contrast the authentic self and the adapted self as part of our journey from moving from one to the other in our the journey of transformation.
Yeah. That's so, yeah. The thing that's so fascinating to me is that the adapted self, we barely even know it exists until we hear it named, right? Because that's how we've survived. So it's we just think, oh, that's just how I roll.
Right.
Yeah. Well, and
yeah,
I
come up against it and go, why do I keep doing this? Why this isn't working? We still try to make it work. But there comes a point where it really isn't helpful anymore, and we need to let it go. But but that's not an easy journey. That's a long journey.
Right. And that's where I love the fact that you are approaching the Enneagram from a spiritual, Christian, biblical perspective. Because for me personally, I feel like being on this journey without Jesus by my side just sounds terrifying.
I agree.
Right?
Yeah,
Oh, gosh.
Sure. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. Well, and in your book, it's so insightful that you included, and I use these all the time. I told you that earlier when we were talking. You've got two portions in your book, Self to Lose, Self-Defined, God's personal invitation of love for each type, and then prayers of confession and consent for each type. And I'm telling you, I use those in spiritual direction often, or even Enneagram consultations, and people cry, they weep, because what you've written is so anointed by the Holy Spirit. It touches us in that deep down place where we abide.
Thank you. Well, and I would say, as I was writing the book, writing those, I felt the most anointed. I mean, you use that word. I felt the most spirit-led. Like I wasn't trying to, wrestle with an idea and try to think of how to communicate it. It was just flowing out. I morphed it a little bit as I, edited it, but that really was a very spiritual experience to write those. And I've heard people say the same thing, that those prayers really speak to them, speak to their hearts, unleash something in them for God to use. So I'm grateful that God has used what he inspired me to write. That's really gratifying.
Oh, I'm so glad. Well, and sometimes I think Christians or people, I don't know who this would be, but feel like being a Christian means you don't have freedom, that you're kind of bound up. And looking at the Enneagram, looking at our walk with Christ, it's all about freedom.
Absolutely. Right. Yes. And being set free. I mean, Jesus talked about freedom a lot, to being set free from all those patterns and those beliefs and those, it's not all about the Enneagram type, that we have wounds and we have a lot that's happened in our life that God wants to touch and transform and heal and lead us to freedom, so that we can live into that authentic self, to live into the person that God designed us to be with such great freedom.
Yeah. Yeah. And that healing aspect is something I really appreciate too about your approach. Because sometimes people will feel like, oh, we call it the vice or the sin, the virtue, the vice, all that the language that's a little dated. And I'm going, well, it could be woundedness and brokenness, and not, any insights on that whole kind of nomenclature that we use?
Sure. And well, funny you should ask, because just today I'm writing my second book, and I need to get the manuscript sent, the draft number 2 back really in the next couple of days. And the chapter I was working on today was From Wounded to Whole. And the one I worked on yesterday was From Bondage to Freedom. So I'm using that kind of from something to something. And we are wounded. We have, all of us in different ways have wounds, messages, perceptions, compulsions that have been really forged very early on in our lives. But the amazing thing to me is that, and I'm sure you see this in your work in spiritual direction, is see breakthroughs that could only be led by the Holy Spirit. And like you said earlier, how do you do this without Jesus? And that all the brain research now that's coming out about how we can reform neural pathways in our brains, like those stories don't have to stay those stories. They can be reframed, and that God could change the story. And I think of, wow, I think the scripture talks about being renewed in your mind, like about being made new. Isn't that interesting that, neuroscience is catching up to the truth of how God made us, that he wants us to be whole.
Yes.
The other passionate thing I have about, I'm kind of my soapbox right now, is that, at least maybe from my spiritual upbringing, it was, you should become less and less, die to yourself. Jesus should increase, you should decrease, which is just such a distortion of the John the Baptist's words about that. And then I think about Jesus, and he walked this earth. He never made anybody less and less. He was all about making people more and more whole, more healed, more free, more alive. I mean, that was his whole MO, on the earth. And he never made people less and less and told them to just, shrink. He wanted them to be elevated and to be highlighted and to be shining stars, And so I really am passionate about that message of Jesus, that we be.
Yeah, you just kind of preached, and that's a good thing. So thank you for that.
Yeah.
I know you are preaching, Gur. You are totally preaching. So
Yeah.
I'm sure, well, I think you find this. I find this, that as I talk to folks and they come to me to discuss and explore the Enneagram, especially Christian folks, they will focus on one aspect of the Enneagram and kind of ignore all the rest. And they're focused on this, like, yeah, this is what's going to help me in my walk with Christ. I mean, do you have a sense, is there an aspect of the Enneagram or a part of the structure that is kind of like more applicable to our spiritual life than others? I mean, what's your sense of that?
Well, all of them, I think you're referring to subtypes or centers or stances or the harmony triads. There's just so many different ways that it can be used and looked at, and all of them are really helpful. They speak to us at different times. And so, one aspect might be, what I call a holy aha moment. Like when you learn that, the withdrawn types have an orientation to the past, you go, oh, that makes sense. That's me. Or any of the other, elements of the Enneagram. So they're all helpful. But, I always say this is not the golden key that unlocks the mystery of who we are. And I sense that people are trying to find that one sentence, that if they just knew that one part, one thing, that they would be set free, that, it would all make sense and they'd be free and they could just carry on with life. And I just think we're looking sometimes in the wrong place for that kind of freedom. And so in my work, and this new book that I'm writing in, actually, I think the title will be Come Further In. Out of the words of C.S. Lewis at the end of The Last Battle is the invitation to come further in. And I introduced this in Self to Lose, Self to Find, and I develop it a lot more in book 2, is that we have a head, we have a heart, we have a gut, that's those centers, but we also have a spirit. We have a spiritual knowing that transcends that. And I believe everybody does, not just, Jesus people, but that we were born with a spirit, and that's where we connect with God. And so I wondered when I was writing book 1, where can that be shown on this symbol? And so I put it in the middle of the circle, in that spacious place, and that it is love-centered. It's, our spiritual center with God, our union with God is represented there. And so book 2, I've added some arrows to the middle. Rather than the arrows going around and around and around. I mean, I don't say I'm adding to the Enneagram, I say I'm creating a new paradigm. So it's separate. So I'm not trying to, change the Enneagram because it is what it is.
Well, that's why I'm laughing, because I'm going, Marilyn, you're messing with the arrows.
Right. Yeah. I say that arrows are great, and I think they're helpful. But they, between you and me and us, they don't land anywhere. Where which is good too. It's fine. They're helpful.
No, say more about that. They don't land anywhere.
They, where's their final destination? What's the final destination of the arrow? And so I'm not discounting them, but I'm adding arrows that go, and I'm placing, well, you'll have to just buy the new book because I've created an image where the arrows go from the outside where our adapted self strategies reside to the inside toward the circle and a more centered life with God, and that we are being drawn to the center and the invitation, come further in. And really, if you think about it, if you are in the middle of the Enneagram and you're centered with God, you're equidistant from all the types. And so we become more and more free to express, to be demonstrations of the fruit of the Spirit or the divine gifts of all the types, even though we still have a specialty, that is ours, that we're the best at, and that's our Enneagram type structure. So.
Wow.
That makes sense.
It does. I mean, and I think you call it a centered, is that right? Centered approach?
Right. Yeah. Yes. We talk, I used this terminology that was written several years ago about churches could either be bounded set or centered set churches. And, a bounded set, church or otherwise, means that everyone in this circle or in this set is the same. And people outside that set aren't in the set if they don't have this belief or this character, or and we could apply this to it's a mathematical concept really. And so I've been seeing and I've been cautious and concerned about the Enneagram because it's so popular and there's so many resources and so much social media memes and lists of what people like for Christmas and what makes them happy and how they respond, that I fear that it's becoming a bounded set paradigm where all 7s do this, all 2s do this, all 5s don't do this, and that we are creating a bounded set. So a centered set is that everything in the set is related to the middle. So I believe all of us are being drawn by God towards a relationship with God and life with God, whether they know it or not. And that if we're all pointing to the middle, and on a pilgrimage, however long it takes, we're being drawn to a more centered life with the one who created us. So I'm using a centered set approach. That makes a lot of sense because, and you've run into this too, that initially sometimes folks will be resistant to the Enneagram going, I don't want to be put in a box. I don't want to be labeled. I don't want to be, well, that's very 7 of you. And what you're saying is right. You are right, sir. We don't want to do that to you. Exactly. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. And the Enneagram was never meant to do that.
Right.
To be that kind of a tool where it's our natural human tendency to categorize things because then we can make sense of everything, but we can't put everybody in a bounded set box, about their Enneagram type. Right. Even though there are obviously common characteristics of all 9s or 2s or 4s, that's how we identify those patterns. But
that's true.
Turning the attention toward the middle.
That's fascinating. Well, I know one of my friends here at Jesus People has been operating as a 1 for a number of years and we use Jerry Wagner's WEPS test sometimes. So he took that test and he actually tested as a 4, but with a big chunk of 1 and then a big chunk of 6. And so as we're looking at that, I mean, that kind of validates what you're saying, that no, we're a mix of all of these. We have percentages, which is what Jerry uses in his test, percentages. So that's why my 7 is going to look different from someone else's 7 because I've got a bigger chunk of 2, or right? Would that be accurate?
Yeah, for sure. And I think, that's the other addition or aspect that creates a bounded set thinking is those, relying on test to tell you what you are, whether it's, there's all kinds of different assessments and they're helpful. I'm not putting those aside either. But people, I hear so many times, well, I took the test and I scored this, and this, so I must be a 2 or a 4. And I say, well, does that resonate with your life experience? How about looking at the other ones? Maybe you had a bad day and you just tested out as whatever, and it really wasn't a reflection of the general way you live. And so we can over depend on assessments, which we really love to do.
Right. Oh, you're right. Well, and that's why I tell folks, they'll go, I took a test, and I'll go, did you pay for it? And they'll go, no. And I went, well, okay, there's that, because you get what you pay for. But that's why people like you and I have become certified with the Enneagram, because we have done so much study and really done the work to help people tease this out. I really think, tests are great. And the narrative tradition is a wonderful approach too, where you sit and listen to people from all the different styles and you kind of make your own assessment. But still having a professional person who's trained in this sit down with you and ask those very questions, like, does this resonate? What's your life experience? And what would you add to that as you sit with people who are trying to really discern?
If they come to me and say, well, I'm a type 5, blah, 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 blah. And I say, well, tell me, what is it about type 5 that tells you what is it about you that tells you you're type 5? Or, what did you notice? What is the thing that stands out to you for you as a 5? And so, tease out, like you said, I love that word, tease out what their experience is, because everyone's experience is unique and special and individual to them. And so teasing out what it is, what aspect of the type is most prevalent in their life, and can be what they love about themselves, what they hate about themselves, or what they struggle with the most. And that's how we can help people grow, is to identify the barriers in the ways that, like that quote you said, is how we our type strategies hinder that full expression, that full freedom of being the person God designed us to become.
Right.
It's really
helpful. It really is. And enabling us to not only be free, but experience that healing and that growth and that transformation that Christ offers us within this context. I just love it, how it all kind of works together, going, oh my word, you can't make this stuff up.
It's really true.
It's pretty cool.
It's a tool used in the hands of God. It's very powerful and transformative and eye-opening and just so helpful to have this kind of a tool, which is, has so many different aspects that are so helpful in helping us understand ourselves.
Yeah, I agree. So you have a lot of people come to you as you deal with the Enneagram. You do workshops, you do retreats and seminars and individual consultations. So what are typical questions that people ask you where they're going, wait, what? How does that work? What are some of the questions that folks come to you with?
I hear the most, especially at retreats, there are conferences that I present, is that are you that same type your whole life, or do you change types? And I particularly hear this when older people are there, and I always present in a Jesus context most of the time. I mean, almost 95% of the time. So they're coming with a faith story. And so they think, well, I was like this when I was 20, but I just don't identify with that anymore. Do we change? And my answer to that, as brief as I can make it, is that there's a dynamism. What I love about the Enneagram is the dynamism of it. And that, work has been done. And that's the other, aspect of what is an unhealthy one look like that's stuck in their adapted self pattern and, going in a vortex, all the time with their type, and they know. And that usually happens when you're younger because you're still developing. And then there's the higher elements where you're free and you're expressing the best of how God designed you and made you. But it doesn't mean you change types. It means you've matured. You've grown healthier. You've let go of stuff. And so I tell the older group, well, God's been redeeming you all these years. And so he's been refining you, and he, your type is being developed, and you're just a healthier version of your type. But, in Enneagram theory, you don't change, but you do, as you said earlier, we are a blend. And so I think the lines get a little blurrier between the types as we get older, even though, again, as I said, we have our specialty one, and we get trapped by our pattern traps, more frequent, our whole life. It's still Achilles heel for us, because the temptation will always be there to go down that road of our adapted self patterns.
Right. Yeah. And I appreciate with the Enneagram that there are the 9 levels of health and growth and development, the lowest being that you're probably barely functional, and the highest being that you're just about the 4th member of the Trinity. Right. And so most of us are kind of in between there, and growing, and then maybe some setbacks. But yeah, I agree. The dynamic nature of the Enneagram I find so helpful. It is not a stagnant model.
Right. And it's not an either or model, like you're this or you're this.
Right.
Like some of the other models are. I won't mention those, but
yeah.
And I would, what you just said, yeah, it's like when I read about an unhealthy 9, which I identify with, I just go, oh, that is just me at my worst, and I'm paralyzed, and I do not like me there. But when I read about a healthy 9, I go, ooh, yeah, I like living like that. Yeah, that is my best self, and that is when I'm all cylinders are firing and I'm feeling good and well, a sense of well-being. So, again, those levels of health are helpful to help us kind of point to what we want to get to.
Right.
This is the better way to live.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and your husband, Jeff, is a 3 and you are a 9. I'm sorry, but that's really funny. I'm sure you have stories. And one of the questions you had mentioned when we spoke earlier was the compatibility issue. So talk to us about that.
Okay. Yeah. People do ask that, like, are some types better suited for each other than others? And, that's a great question, because we are in relationships, whether they're a marriage or a family, or whether they're a community like you're in. And my belief, and maybe it's naive, but I believe everyone can get along if we're whole ourselves, and if we're free to love others and have an acceptance and forgiveness and all of that. So, but I think there are types that have more juice in them, that create more disruption, might create more disruption, but it's kind of how they are. And so I think the on that aspect, the thing that was most helpful for me when you talked about earlier aspects was understanding our subtypes, because the 3 and the 9, for Daphne, the 3 and the 9 definitely have their dynamics and it creates problems. But when I understood he was a social 3, which like a 3 on steroids, and I'm a 1-to-1 9, which like is a 9-9, then I understood where our real conflict lies, is that I'm begging him to just have one-on-one, and he's like sees me as part of the tribe, part of the group, and I didn't like that. And so that was usually more of a rub than our type structure. So in that way, it's helpful to understand our differences of subtypes, to know what's important to us and important to the other person, and how it gets activated if we feel threatened. Is it the subtypes? Yeah. If we feel threatened when those needs aren't met.
Yeah, because there's the self-preservation, the social, and the 1-to-1, also known as the sexual. Yeah, those are powerful. Well, and also if you've got one partner, and whether it's spouses or friends or whatever, one partner who's a healthy version of their style, and then the other partner who's an unhealthy version of their style, that's also a challenge, right?
It is a challenge. Yes, it is. Yeah. So, those are fodder for counseling.
I know, right? That's why God created therapists.
Yes.
So what about the Enneagram with kiddos? Both of us have a lot of friends who have young children or teenagers, and they go, when can we do the Enneagram to our kids? And I say that to our kids.
Right. Well, it's funny because when I first learned it back those 30 some years ago, Richard Rohr said, well, this is not for anyone under the age of 40. And so you kind of you get tied to what you first learned. I'm realizing, like, don't change that. And so I've been fascinated in this last 3 or 4 years when the Enneagram has popped on the stage and been so popular that the millennials just eat this up. And I'm kind of curious about that, but it's making sense to them. But I think 30 years ago, 40-year-olds were just coming into being, I think people are coming to what we were experiencing as 40-year-olds earlier because of all the social media, the global understanding, the world that we live in. There's more to process. And so I find that people are looking to the Enneagram for help in understanding themselves, which is great because they aren't an image on a Facebook page. They want to know that they actually are real and that they have a life and that they have a purpose and they have a personality. But with kids, I really bristle when I hear moms talk about their 4-year-old. Well, I think he's a type 7. I go, no, just let him be. But it does help to know some of it. I mean, just to have inklings, because then you realize, well, my quiet child that loves to read all the time is maybe he's a 5 and I shouldn't be pushing him into all these sports activities because he really doesn't want to do that. He's happy in his room or her room. And so I think you can do it too early. But in terms of, and I think David Daniels did a study on this, is that it really isn't till they're like in 16 or 17 that their brains are developed enough to apply it, to get it. Before that, it's kind of abstract.
Right.
Because their brains are thinking abstractly. So I think that's when the conversations are more helpful and more possible with that age group.
That makes sense. It's interesting that if as I talk with folks and they go, well, when did I develop this? And I go, well, you've kind of always had it. And I go, think back to when you were a little kiddo. Because if you saw little 3-year-old Oreon, you'd go, oh my gosh, she is such a 7. Right. I mean, and yes, I still am doggone it. And, 7s, we love being 7s. So that's kind of a fun thing. But the thing that, as you mentioned, the millennials and the young adults, folks in their 20s and 30s, I've found the Enneagram to be an amazing tool as they go through their vocational discernment process.
Yeah.
Right?
For sure.
That's been so good. Yeah. Well, we are plugging along here. This is so great. I love that you're with us tonight, Marilyn. I so appreciate this. We all do. And let's get down and dirty here. I know in your wonderful book, A Self to Lose, A Self to Find, you have some spiritual practices, and I believe that you're willing to lead us through one this evening.
Right. Well, yes, one of the things I say over and over to any group that I'm with is if you don't take the time to pause, to notice, and to reflect on what's going on in you, then you're just going to keep going on autopilot and think, and not really set yourself up for a transformation, for allowing God's work to happen in your life. But part of our job is we need to slow down and to pause and to be curious. Like, why did I just get so angry? Or why am I jealous? Or why didn't I sleep all night? Like, what's going on below the surface? Because it's usually something. And so I realized in many, Christian circles that we haven't been taught very well how to be reflective, how to be self-reflective, because maybe that's, self-centered or self-absorbed. or new agey or whatever they want to call it, because it's hard work. And so the end of my book, I wanted an application. And so I created an acronym, Own Up, as just a tool for that kind of reflection. And it stands for observe, which is it's just like saying, like I just said, like, oh, my stomach's in knots, or I'm really angry at that person, or just being observant of yourself, like a scientific experiment. Like, okay, I did this, I'm doing this, or I feel this, or I thought this, and observe, like just make note of those. And then the next step, Own Up, is W, and this is my favorite step because it's very counterintuitive, is to welcome it. Welcome the anger, welcome the jealousy, welcome the anxiety, and welcome God right into the middle of that. Rather than, our tendency is to push it away, to give it to God, or deny it, or be mad at the other person, or blame, or deflect, or all kinds of mechanisms we have of getting it away from us. And to welcome it is so transformative. Sometimes that's almost enough, is to just welcome that and welcome God right into the middle of that, of whatever it is you're experiencing. And so then that's welcome. And then the next step is to name it. And give it a label, like name, what am I afraid of? And this is where the Enneagram steps in as so helpful. If we know our Enneagram type and the patterns and the nuances of our type, then we can say, what am I afraid of in this situation? Or what am I avoiding? Or, what is it about how does my Enneagram type inform me of why I reacted that way? And so to just name, it can be a whole list of names, or naming a list of things. And the other thing that's really important in this is to name, how am I trying to live out my divine gift, like me as a 9, a peacemaker? How am I trying to create peace on my own, in my own strategy, which usually gets me all worked up about trying to be everything to everybody. And so I can honor that, oh, this is coming out of my desire for peace. I'm just doing it in the wrong way and it's not working. So that's name. The next one is untangle. And this is where just giving some thought and some prayer. And this part of it, it takes a while. This isn't just like boom, boom, boom. Is to untangle, like, what is it? I think of it as like a rope that's all tied up and it's all bound up. And if you get a hold of that one loop that you can, how you can ease it apart, then everything kind of starts to fall away. So the untangle is identifying that really the one thing, this is really about this. Oops, did I freeze? Because I lost a connection.
No, you're good. You're good.
Okay. And so that's untangle. And then the next step is and, kind of letting it go, just letting it go, whatever it is, untangle it, untie it, and then possess. The next one is to possess what comes to you. Because when you leave that, you open up that space, you let go of something, God wants to give you a gift. And it might be a new idea, a different way to approach something. It might be a sense of peace or settled, or, all kinds of things come in, and to possess that as a gift from God for you as your own. So Own Up is owning up to your stuff and owning up to your truest self too. So that it's just a, reflective process. That
I envision the whole process of sitting with it, right? That's a good spiritual direction concept of sitting with it, breathing, maybe journaling, walking, mindfulness, all those propensities that help us to focus in. That is so good. And this Own Up reflection, that there's a reflection sheet that's on your website.
It is.
Oh, I love that. So let's talk about your stuff. So the book, Self to Lose, Self to Find. I love this book, as you all know. And in fact, I have copies that I loan out here at Jesus People. And just to make sure I get it back, I have this so that they will make sure and give my book back to me, and I got the hardcover copy, because I refer to it so often.
Okay.
So Self to Lose, Self to Find, you can find it, friends, wherever you get your books, an independent bookstore, you can order it, Amazon, wherever you do your shopping. Marilyn Vancil is on Instagram and Facebook. You've got your wonderful website, www.marilynvancil.com. That's where the Own Up sheet is, reflection sheet that's free, that we can have that. I love that. And the new book, when's the new book going to be coming out?
It'll come out next spring. So got a little ways to go, but so it'll be next spring. And speaking of my website, and if you look under resources, I think that's where that Own Up sheet is, and you can just print it off, download it, print it off. It's yours to do, copy as much as you want. If there's also a way to sign up for my website, or my mailing list, I should say. And if you do, then you get these relationship sheets, like what is it like to live with a 2? What is it like to, know me as a 1 or know me as a 3 or whatever. And so you can get those. And I do not inundate people with emails. You will not get an email from me. Maybe you will every 6 months. But I will be ramping that up as my new book is starting to come out, and I will give, a preview of some of the content, and it would be a way for people to know how they can pre-order, what's coming, and just being in touch with what I do and what I offer. And it's a way to connect with people. So they can sign up for my newsletter on the website as well. Yeah.
And I know we've talked that I hope, as things continue to open up from the COVID, that when you do your international book tour, that you will stop here at Jesus People at our venue called Wilson Abbey in Chicago. Yeah. So Chicagoland people, watch out, because I know where Marilyn lives and she's my friend. So I'm going to make sure she comes and hangs out with us. Any final words from you, Marilyn?
Well, let's see. On the Enneagram, I would just say use it as a tool. I hope it's helpful, and feel free to email me questions. I do answer emails. It may not be right away because I'm trying to finish up here with this writing, but I do love hearing from people. And so if you have any questions you want to field with me, or just give me some feedback, it's you can do that through my website. So
nice. Oh, yeah. MarilynVancil.com. Yeah, we intentionally, so friends who are watching and listening, we intentionally did not entertain questions tonight because we just weren't ready for the onslaught of, okay, so I'm a 7 and my friend is an 8. And not that you all would do that, because we know you wouldn't, but it could be a little overwhelming. So we're going to just let you connect directly with Marilyn, and she can respond to you as she's able, because she is trying to get this book done. So it might be a minute, right? But you will get back to everyone.
I will. I always get back. Yeah,
I love that. That's so good. So good. And I have asked Marilyn this evening, as we end our time together, first of all, thanks everybody for joining us. You didn't have to take time out of your schedule to be here, but you did. I mean, it's summer and people are out and about, but here you are. So thank you for joining us. Marilyn, thank you so much for being with us.
It's been a pleasure. It's so good to be with you, Oreon.
Yeah, this is rich. And I have invited Marilyn to close our time tonight with a blessing. So bless us, will you please, my friend?
Be happy to. Yes. Oh, Lord God, creator, friend, counselor, comforter, the triune God, thank you for the Jesus people in Chicago. Bless them as they seek to do your will, to serve the people that they live with and the people in their community with your love, your provisions, your truth. Bless them, and may they each one be fruitful and multiply in goodness and love and hope and depth and wisdom, faithfulness, joy, power, and peace as they reflect your glorious image. We pray this all in Jesus' precious name. Amen.
Amen. Thanks again, my friend.
Okay, so good to be with you and all you people out there who I can't see, but I'm excited to someday come and meet you in person.
All right. Excellent. And everyone's, keep in touch with us at Jesus People, because we will have another conversation probably about a month. So God bless you all. Good night.
Good night.